I was standing 10 feet away when they threw Nora's things into a trash bag. Not a box, not a suitcase, a black garbage bag, the kind you use for yard waste, twisted at the top and dropped on the driveway of the most expensive piece of land in Albemarle County, Virginia. Nora was on her knees on the brick pavers, trying to pull it back open. Her hands were shaking. Trent Ashford stood over her in his blue suit, telling her she needed to leave. His mother, Margaret, had Nora by the arm. Neither of them knew what was in that bag. Neither of them knew what I was about to find out. Neither of them had any idea that in 63 days, a circuit court judge in Charlottesville would tell the Ashford family exactly who Nora Calloway was and what she owned. My name is Joanna Waverly. Most people call me Joe. Nora and I met our first week of college, bonded over a broken dorm radiator and a shared hatred of 8 a.m. classes, and had been close ever since. We talked every week. I visited when I could. She visited me in Richmond when she could. I was visiting the weekend, everything fell apart. I'd driven out to the Ashford estate on a Friday afternoon, the kind of late October afternoon in the Virginia Piedmont that makes you understand why people have been fighting over this land for 300 years. The Blue Ridge was doing its thing on the western horizon, going purple and gold in the late light. The trees along the Ashford driveway, 2 rows of old red oaks, and the kind that take a century to grow like that, were dropping leaves in slow red circles. The main house sat at the end of that driveway like it had always been there and always would be. Federal style, the kind Charlottesville is full of, red brick, white trim, 8 fireplaces you could see the chimneys of from the road. The Ashfords had owned it for 4 generations, which in Virginia means it comes with its own mythology. People in Albemarle County knew the Ashford name the way they know the names of the mountains. Nora had been living there for almost 2 years. She'd moved in after she and Trent got serious, which happened fast, the way things sometimes do when both people are lonely in the same direction. She'd given up her apartment in Charlottesville proper. She'd been working remote anyway. She did grant writing for a nonprofit, and the estate had good internet and a study with a window seat that she'd claimed as her own. She'd also, quietly, completely, fallen in love with the place. Not just the land and the house, with the whole fabric of it. With Trent's father, Richard, who was 78, and had the unhurried way of talking that old Virginia men have. He who took his coffee on the side porch every morning, and could name every bird in the garden by sound alone. With the kitchen that smelled like cast iron and old wood. With the way the morning came through the east windows in long flat bars. She belonged there. That was the thing. Not because of Trent. Not because of the money or the name. She just fit. Which is maybe why what happened hit so hard. I pulled up to the house at 4 in the afternoon. I heard them before I saw them. She raised voices carrying through the cool air from the side of the house. Not screaming. Worse. The controlled, clipped kind of arguing where everyone is working hard to sound calm and none of it is calm. I came around the corner of the house and stopped. Trent was near the side door. He had that rigid posture he gets when he's made a decision and doesn't want to discuss it. Shoulders back, jaw set, both hands slightly open at his sides, like he was managing himself. He was still in the suit he'd been wearing to some meeting in town. Nora was a few feet from him. She had on jeans and one of her weekend sweaters, the green one with the worn cuffs. Her hair was down. She looked like someone who'd been pulled out of an ordinary afternoon without warning. Margaret Ashford was on the steps behind Nora. Margaret is 71, silver-haired, impeccably turned out in a way that cost money and also effort. She was wearing her blue velvet dress, the one she puts on when she wants to signal formality. Her pearl earrings. Her expression was the one she uses when she has decided something and is simply waiting for the other people in the room to catch up. A black garbage bag sat on the brick pavers between them. I understood what I was looking at before anyone said anything. Trent. I kept my voice level. What's happening? He glanced at me. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the expression of someone who had been hoping to finish this before there were witnesses. Joe. He said my name like it was a mild inconvenience. This doesn't concern you. She's my best friend, standing in your driveway in front of a garbage bag. That concerns me. Joanna. Margaret's voice was measured, practiced. This is a private family matter. Joe. Nora's voice was quieter than both of theirs. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was up. Sigh, it's okay. It was not okay. I looked at the bag, at Nora, at the way Margaret's hand was on Nora's arm. Not comforting, gripping, the way you grip someone you're moving somewhere. What's in the bag? I asked. My things, Nora said. Why are your things in a bag? Trent exhaled. We've asked Nora to move out. It's not. We decided, Margaret said, from the steps, correcting him without looking at him. That was a whole relationship in 2 words. I looked at Nora. She was looking at the bag. Her hand went to it, working at the twist tie at the top. Her fingers were cold. I could tell from the way they were moving, stiff and slow. What's in there that you need? I asked. There's a photo, she said quietly, of my grandfather. She got the bag open, knelt down, started moving through it, clothes, toiletries, a book, a charger. Her hands found a framed photograph, and she pulled it out and held it against her chest with both arms. That was the moment I took a picture. I don't know why exactly. Instinct, maybe. Or something told me I was watching something that would matter later. Trent saw me take it. His jaw tightened. You need to be off this property, he said. To both of us now. Trent. I looked at him directly. She has been living in your house for 2 years. She has been... Joanna. Margaret came down the steps, one slow, deliberate step at a time. I understand you're being a loyal friend, but Nora's relationship with my son is finished, and her time in this home is finished with it. This is not negotiable, and this is not a conversation. She said it the way people say things they've been saying their whole lives. The way old money talks, not loud, not angry, just certain, absolute, like the decision was made in a room you were never invited into, and there's simply nothing left to discuss. Nora was still on her knees, photograph held against her chest. See, I looked at the photo as she lowered it slightly. An older man, silver-haired, standing in front of some kind of stone wall. Big smile, outdoor light. Something old and southern about the image. The trees in the background, the stone, the quality of the afternoon in it. Is that your grandfather Harold? I asked. Nora nodded. When did he pass? Before I was born, she said. My mom gave me this photo when I turned 18. Said he'd have loved to know me. Something registered in the back of my mind then. Small, like a door opening a crack. But I didn't know what it meant yet. We got everything into my car. The garbage bag went in the trunk. Nora sat in the passenger seat, with the photo in her lap, both hands flat on the frame, looking out the window as I backed down the Ashford driveway. The red oaks moved slowly past. The house sat at the end of the view, getting smaller. She didn't look away from it until we were on the main road. I'm sorry, I said. Don't. She said it gently. Don't apologize for him. We drove a few miles without talking. The mountains were getting dark on the west side now, the last light going orange above them. Did you have any warning? I asked. She took a moment. Margaret told him something, she said. I don't know exactly what. I know she never liked me. I wasn't from the right family. You wasn't the right kind of person for the name. She paused. She told him I was only there for the money. After Richard died, that I'd been playing a long game. Richard Ashford had died 6 weeks earlier, quietly in his room, the way he'd lived, without drama, without fuss. Nora had been with him the last weeks. She'd read to him, sat with him on the porch when he could still manage it. She said I was running out the clock, Nora said, waiting for the estate to settle. Her voice was flat, not devastated, controlled in a way that was harder to watch than crying. And Trent believed her, I said. She was quiet. Trent wanted to believe her, she said finally. I think there's a difference. I thought about that for a mile or so. The photo, I said. Tell me about your grandfather, Harold Calloway. She looked down at the frame. Mom doesn't talk about him much. He died young, before she was even pregnant with me. He grew up out here, somewhere in Albemarle County. Us owned some land. She ran her thumb along the edge of the frame. Mom always said he loved this county. Said he used to say nobody understood land the way people who'd worked it understood land. The cracked door in my mind opened a little wider. Do you know where he lived? I asked. Specifically. No. She shook her head. I never asked. I should have asked. Do you have any of his papers? Anything from when he lived here? She looked at me. Why? I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. But I want to ask your mom something. Nora looked at me for a long second. Her eyes searched my face. Joe, she said slowly, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, I said carefully, that your grandfather stood in front of a stone wall to take that photo. And that stone wall looked a lot like the old boundary wall at the back of the Ashford property. I paused. The one Richard told me. The one time he showed me around, that had been there longer than the house. The car was quiet. Outside, the last light died on the mountains. Nora looked back down at the photograph. Her hands had gone very still. We stayed that night at a motel on Route 250, not because we couldn't afford better, because neither of us wanted to drive 2 hours back to Richmond in the dark with a garbage bag in the trunk, and that photograph on the dashboard, and all those unanswered questions sitting in the car with us. The motel was the kind that's been there for 40 years and has a soda machine outside every room and curtains that don't fully close. I got us 2 rooms. Nora said she was fine. I didn't believe her, but I let it alone. I sat on my bed with my laptop and started pulling threads. The first thing I searched was simple. Harold Calloway, Albemarle County, Virginia. Land records, property history. What came back was not simple. Here's what I knew about old Virginia land before that night. Not much. Oh, I grew up in Richmond. My parents were both teachers. Land records and deed histories were not dinner table conversation. But I knew how to research. My actual job, I'm a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Richmond, meant I knew where to look and what I was looking at when I found it. The Albemarle County Circuit Court Clerk's Office keeps land records going back centuries. Most of it is digitized now, or at least indexed. You can search by grantor, grantee, deed book, year range. I searched Harold J. Calloway. 6 results came back. I sat up straighter. The earliest was a deed from decades ago. Harold J. Calloway, receiving a parcel of land in Albemarle County from an estate sale. The parcel was described by its historical metes and bounds. 214 acres. The description included reference points I didn't recognize at first. Then, I pulled up a satellite map of the Ashford estate. I sat there looking at it for a long time. The shape of the 2 parcels, the one in Harold's deed and the Ashford estate as it currently sat, overlapped, not partially, almost completely. My mouth went dry. I kept reading. 3 more deed entries followed over the next few years. Small conveyances, boundary adjustments, an easement granted to a neighboring property, normal land management activity, then the 5th entry, a deed of sale, Harold J. Calloway, grantor, Ashford Land Holdings, LLC, grantee, 178 acres. 178, not 214. My paralegal brain did the math immediately. 36 acres unaccounted for, either retained by Harold or conveyed separately in a document I hadn't found yet. The 6th entry was a 1-page instrument that made me put my hand flat on the desk and just breathe for a second. It was a deed restriction, filed by Harold J. Calloway, attached as a covenant running with the land at the time of sale to Ashford Land Holdings. The language was old-fashioned and dense, but the meaning was clear enough once I worked through it. The restriction stated that upon the death of the last surviving male heir of the Ashford family, ownership interest in the primary parcel, meaning the main house and surrounding grounds, would revert examination to the Calloway bloodline, specifically to any living direct descendants of Harold J. Calloway. I read it 3 times. Then I knocked on Nora's door. She opened it in the green sweater, hair pushed back, eyes that said she hadn't been sleeping either. The photograph was on the nightstand behind her, propped against the lamp. "Come look at this," I said. She came. She sat on the edge of my bed and read what I'd found. I watched her face while she read it. Watched the small changes, the line that appeared between her eyebrows, the way her jaw went slightly slack, the moment her eyes stopped moving, because she'd hit the part she needed to reread. She looked up. "Ace, revert to the Calloway bloodline," she said. "Yeah." "Upon the death of the last surviving male heir of the Ashford family." "Yeah." "Richard was the last Ashford male." "He died 6 weeks ago," I said. She looked back at the screen. Her hands were in her lap, completely still, the way hands go when the brain is using everything it has. "This could mean nothing," she said carefully. "This could be some old document that got superseded, that got legally extinguished decades ago. These things happen." "They do," I said. "That's why we need a property attorney to look at it. Joe." She turned to me. Her voice was steady, but something behind her eyes was moving fast. "I don't have money for a property attorney." "I know people," I said. "Let me make some calls." She looked at the photograph on her nightstand. "My grandfather put that restriction in there," she said quietly, not asking, just understanding it out loud. "It looks that way. He sold most of the land. But he kept that clause." She was thinking out loud now. "Why would he do that?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think your mom might." We called Carol Calloway the next morning. Nora's mother lives in Roanoke, about an hour and a half southwest. She's 63, retired from teaching, keeps a garden that she posts about constantly, and a cat named Biscuit that she posts about even more. She and Nora talk every Sunday. She is the kind of woman who picks up on the first ring and already knows something is wrong from the way you say hello. "What happened, baby?" she said. Before Nora even started, Nora told her all of it. The engagement ending, the trash bag, the driveway. Her voice stayed even through most of it, dipped only once, when she described being on her knees on the brick pavers. Carol was quiet through the whole thing in the specific way of a mother who is processing pain on behalf of her child. When Nora finished, Carol said, "I'll come to you." "Mom, we're an hour from Roanoke." "I'll come to you," she said again. "Where are you?" We gave her the motel name. She was there by 11. Carol Calloway is a small woman with Nora's same brown eyes and a way of taking up a room that has nothing to do with physical size. She came through the motel door with an overnight bag and a container of homemade oatmeal cookies that she'd apparently grabbed on her way out, because that is simply who she is, and she held Nora for a long time without saying anything. Then she sat down, looked at my laptop screen, and went very still. "Where did you find this?" she said. "Albemarle County Circuit Court records," I said. "Publicly available." Carol looked at the deed restriction for a long time. Her finger traced something on the screen without touching it. The name. Harold J. Calloway. "Mom," Nora sat beside her. "Did you know about this?" Carol was quiet. "Not about this specifically," she said finally. "Not the legal details." She sat back, folded her hands in her lap. "But I knew your grandfather didn't just sell that land and walk away." "What does that mean?" Carol was quiet for a moment, looking at the cookie container on the table like she was deciding something. "Your grandfather Harold grew up on that land," she said. "His family had farmed it for 2 generations before him. It wasn't a grand estate back then. It was working land. Cattle, some crops, an orchard." She paused. "He loved it. He truly loved it the way people loved the place that made them." "So why did he sell it?" Nora asked. "Money. The 60s were hard years for small farmers in Virginia, especially." She stopped, started again. "Especially for families like ours. There was pressure. There were debts. The Ashford family had money and wanted land, and made an offer." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Harold took it because he had to, but he didn't take it quietly." "The restriction," I said. Carol nodded. "He talked about it. Not often. Not in specific legal terms. But he'd say he made sure the land remembered who it came from." She looked at Nora. "I thought it was just something he said. The way old men talk about things they've lost. I didn't know he'd actually—" She gestured at the screen. "Done something about it." The motel room was quiet, except for the distant sound of Route 250 outside. "The last male Ashford heir died 6 weeks ago," I said carefully. Carol looked at me. Richard Ashford, Nora said. Carol looked at her daughter for a long time. Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully name. Part recognition, part something older and deeper than that. Yash, your grandfather would have known the Ashford family, Carol said slowly. He sold to them directly. He would have known their family structure. She was working through it out loud, the way Nora does. Like mother, like daughter. He would have known there was one son, one heir. He planned for this, Nora said. He planned for this, Carol said. The three of us sat with that for a moment. I thought about Harold Calloway standing in front of that stone wall on the eastern boundary of the land he'd grown up on, the land he'd had to sell, smiling that big smile for whoever was taking the picture. I thought about what it means to love a piece of ground so much that you encode your bloodline into its future with a legal instrument before you let it go. I thought about Nora, on her knees on the brick driveway of that same land, reaching into a garbage bag, and holding her grandfather's photograph against her chest. I thought about the Ashfords standing over her on land that might not be theirs. Something in my chest went tight, and then steady. Nora, I said. She looked at me. I need to call my firm Monday morning, I said. First thing. I know a property attorney in Charlottesville who handles exactly this kind of case. I paused. But I need you to hear me on something first. Okay, she said. This is going to be a process. It could take months. It could get complicated. The Ashfords have money, and they'll have lawyers. I looked at her steadily. And it's going to require you to fight for something that is yours. Not Trent's, not the engagement. Not any of that. Yours. By blood and by your grandfather's legal intent. Nora looked at the screen. At Harold's name in the old deed instrument. Her hands, which had been still in her lap, turned over. Palms up. Like she was deciding whether to hold something. Oh, he put it there for me, she said quietly. He didn't even know I existed yet. But he put it there for whoever I would be. Her voice didn't break. Yeah, I said. He did. She looked at me. Call your attorney, she said. Monday morning, I called Patricia Odom. Patricia is 55, has been practicing property and land law in Charlottesville for 26 years. Nguyen has the specific energy of a woman who has spent her career being underestimated in Virginia courtrooms and has long since stopped finding it surprising. She'd done work adjacent to our firm twice. I knew her well enough to call her directly. I explained what we'd found. She was quiet through most of it. When I finished, she was quiet for another 3 seconds. Send me everything, she said. How does it look? I asked. Send me everything, she said again. Yeah, I don't speculate before I read. I sent everything. She called back Tuesday afternoon. The restriction is real, she said. It's properly filed, properly attached, and it has not been legally extinguished. The Ashfords either didn't know about it or chose not to address it, which is... A pause. Interesting. Can we enforce it? That depends on Nora Calloway's documentation of her lineage. We need to establish direct descent from Harold J. Calloway beyond any reasonable dispute. Another pause. Can she do that? I looked at Nora across the table where we were sitting together, the phone between us. Her mother is Harold's daughter, I said. Carol Calloway. She has a birth certificate. Harold is named as her father. Good, Patricia said. That's very good. A beat. One more thing. What? The Ashford family is going to say the restriction is unenforceable. They're going to throw everything they have at this. Then their lawyers are going to be expensive, and they are going to be aggressive. Her voice was steady, even. I want Nora to understand that before we file anything. I looked at Nora. Nora had been listening to the whole call. She reached over and pressed the speaker button more firmly, like she wanted to make sure she heard this part clearly. Ms. Odom, she said. Nora, Patricia said. They threw my things in a garbage bag, Nora said. On the driveway of land my grandfather farmed. A beat. Yes, they did, Patricia said. File everything, Nora said. Patricia Odom filed the claim on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the Ashford family knew about it. I know this because Nora's phone rang at 4:58, 2 minutes before most offices close for the weekend, which is either coincidence or the specific kind of calculation that expensive lawyers make. And the number was a downtown Charlottesville area code she didn't recognize. She answered it on speaker. We were in Patricia's conference room, going over documentation. Ms. Calloway. The voice was male, smooth, the kind of smooth that comes from decades of being the most expensive person in the room. My name is Conrad Fells. I represent the Ashford family estate. I'm calling as a professional courtesy to let you know that we've received notice of your filing and that we consider it without merit. Nora looked at Patricia. Patricia made a small circular motion with her hand. Keep him talking. Say, okay, Nora said. A pause. He'd expected more than that. We'll be filing a motion to dismiss within the week, Fells continued. The restriction you're relying on is nearly 60 years old and has no modern legal standing. I'd encourage you to consider the cost, financial and personal, of pursuing something that won't succeed. I appreciate the call, Nora said. Another pause. Longer. Ms. Calloway, I've known the Ashford family for 30 years. Margaret Ashford is a woman who protects what's hers. I'd encourage you to think carefully about what you're starting. The conference room was very quiet. Nora's jaw moved once. Set. Mr. Fells, she said, I appreciate the call. She ended it. Patricia looked at her for a second. Then she smiled, brief and sharp. Good, she said, and went back to her notes. The motion to dismiss came in 8 days, not 1 week. It was 42 pages long. I read all 42 pages, because that's who I am. And because Patricia asked me to flag anything that looked like it was reaching. There was plenty of reaching. Fells argued the restriction had been implicitly waived by decades of the Ashford family's uncontested ownership. He argued the language was too vague to be enforceable. He argued that Nora's connection to Harold Calloway was insufficiently documented. That last one was a mistake, because by the time he filed that motion, Carol Calloway had driven back to Roanoke and gone through 30 years of accumulated family paperwork in her hall closet, and come back with a box that contained Harold's original land survey documents, his personal correspondence about the sale, including a letter to a family friend describing the restriction he'd insisted on, and 2 photographs of Harold standing in front of the main house on the estate, taken before the Ashfords ever owned it. The letter was the thing. In Harold's own handwriting, on paper that had gone soft with age, he'd written, I sold the land because I had no choice, but I made sure it knows the way home. If the Ashford line ever ends, the land comes back to mine. I made certain of that. My grandchildren won't have to start from nothing, the way I did. Patricia read that letter and was quiet for a full minute. He wrote this knowing it might be read by someone who hadn't been born yet, she said. Yeah, I said. She looked up. He was precise. He knew exactly what he was doing. She put the letter in a protective sleeve and added it to the filing. The Ashford response escalated the week after that. Not legally. Not yet. Personally. Trent called Nora on a Wednesday evening. She was staying with me by then, back in Richmond, commuting to Charlottesville for meetings with Patricia. She was at my kitchen table eating leftover pasta when her phone lit up. She looked at it for 3 full rings. Then she answered, Nora. His voice came through the speaker. She'd put it on speaker automatically, which told me she didn't want to be alone in this. Can we talk? We're talking, she said. A pause. I didn't know you were going to file a legal claim, he said. I want you to know that what happened in the driveway, the way my mother handled that, I didn't plan it that way. Nora twirled pasta onto her fork. Set it back down. Okay, she said. I'm trying to apologize, he said. I know, she said. Then. Trent. Her voice was even. You stood in your driveway and watched someone put my things in a garbage bag. You didn't stop it. She paused. An apology is nice. It doesn't change what happened. Silence. This claim, he said. His voice shifted, something tighter underneath it now. Do you actually believe it's valid? Or is this? My attorney believes it's valid, she said. That's what matters. Nora. His voice dropped. My mother is... She's taking this personally. Oh, she's... Trent. Nora picked up her fork again. I have to go. She ended the call. She ate 3 more bites of pasta. Then she put her fork down and pressed both palms flat on my kitchen table and looked at the wall for about 30 seconds. Her eyes weren't wet. They were just focused, looking at something I couldn't see. Then she picked her fork back up. "Good pasta," she said. "Thanks," I said. We didn't talk about the call again that night. The first hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after Patricia filed. Albemarle County Circuit Court. A Tuesday morning in early December, the kind of cold that comes down off the mountains and settles into the valley and doesn't move. I drove us in. Nora was quiet most of the way. She had her grandfather's photograph in her bag. She'd been carrying it everywhere since the driveway. I didn't ask about it. Some things you just let people carry. The courthouse in Charlottesville is a handsome building on a hill, all red brick and white columns in the Virginia style. We walked in through the heavy front doors, and the warm air hit us. Central heat, old wood, the particular smell of a building that has been processing human disputes for a very long time. Patricia met us in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked at Nora, gave her a once-over. "How are you?" she said. "Ready," Nora said. So Patricia nodded like that was the right answer and turned toward the courtroom doors. They were already open, people filing in. I followed them through. The Ashford family was already seated at the opposing table. Conrad Fells, I recognized him from a firm photo I'd looked up, was arranging papers with the unhurried efficiency of someone who charges $400 an hour and has done this 1,000 times. He was tall, silver-haired, navy suit. The kind of lawyer who wears his certainty like a second jacket. Margaret Ashford sat beside him. She was in the same blue velvet dress she'd worn in the driveway. I don't know if that was coincidence or a choice. Looking at her, I suspected it was a choice. She sat with her back straight, and her hands folded, and her expression set in that way it gets, sealed, final, certain that the room will eventually come around to her position. Trent was behind her in the gallery. He looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping. His hair was slightly off. His suit jacket was fine, but there was something loosened about him, some tension in the way he sat that hadn't been there in the driveway. Like the driveway had cost him something too, and he was only now getting the bill. He looked at Nora when she came in. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at the front of the room. She didn't look at him again. Judge Warren Holt was 67, compact, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and the patient expression of a man who has heard every variety of human dispute and is no longer surprised by any of them. He came in without ceremony, settled at the bench, put on his glasses. The hearing was procedural, not the full trial, not the ruling. This was the motion to dismiss. Fells's argument that the whole thing should be thrown out before it went further. Fells went first. He was good. I'll give him that. He was organized, precise, and spoke in the kind of measured cadence that sounds like reason, even when it's advocacy. He argued the restriction was a relic, unenforceable by the passage of time alone. He argued the Callaway bloodline connection was circumstantial. He argued that 60 years of uncontested Ashford ownership constituted effective legal abandonment of any claim. He was up there for 22 minutes. Then Patricia stood up. Patricia Odom does not speak in measured cadences. She speaks in plain sentences with the weight of specific facts behind them. She placed Harold's letter, the original, in its protective sleeve, on the exhibit table. She placed the deed restriction. She placed Carol's birth certificate with Harold named as father. She placed the 2 photographs of Harold standing in front of the main house before the Ashfords ever owned it, and then she said simply, "Your Honor, the restriction is real. It is filed, it is attached, and it has never been legally extinguished. The plaintiff is Harold Callaway's direct descendant by documented lineage. The triggering condition, the death of the last surviving male Ashford heir, occurred 6 weeks ago. The restriction does not care how many years have passed. It was written to survive exactly this long." She sat down. She had been standing for 11 minutes. Judge Holt looked at the exhibit table, looked at his notes, looked at Fells. "Mr. Fells," he said, "so does the defense dispute the authenticity of this letter?" Fells adjusted his papers. "We dispute its legal relevance, Your Honor." That's not what I asked, Judge Holt said. Mild, patient, absolutely immovable. A pause. We do not dispute its authenticity, Fels said. Judge Holt looked at the letter for a moment. Motion to dismiss is denied, he said. We'll schedule the full evidentiary hearing. My clerk will contact both parties. He took off his glasses. We're adjourned, he said. The crack of the gavel was small in that room, but it landed like something much larger. I looked at Margaret Ashford when it happened. For one unguarded second, just one, something moved across her face that I hadn't seen there before. Not anger, not the sealed certainty. Something older, something that looked, just briefly, like the face of a woman who had built her whole life on the assumption that her family owned something and had just heard the first real suggestion that they might not. Then it was gone, sealed back up. She leaned toward Fels and said something in a low voice. Fels nodded, wrote something down, but I'd seen it. I nudged Nora's arm as we stood to leave. She looked at me. She's scared, I said quietly. Nora glanced toward Margaret, then looked back at the front of the room. Good, she said. We filed out into the cold Charlottesville morning. The mountains were sharp and clear in the winter light. The city spread out below the courthouse hill. I read brick and bare trees and the particular beauty of a Virginia December. Nora stopped on the courthouse steps. She reached into her bag and took out the photograph. Harold Calloway, stone wall, big smile. She looked at it for a moment. He knew what he was doing, she said. He really did, I said. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. Her hands were steady on the frame. Behind us, the courthouse doors opened and closed as people moved in and out. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday. Justice taking its time, the way it does, moving at its own pace through old wood hallways that have seen everything before. Something was coming. We both felt it. The evidentiary hearing was set for 8 weeks out. 8 weeks sounds like a long time until you're living inside it. For Nora, those 8 weeks had a specific texture. She was back in Richmond, working remote from my spare room, which she'd quietly made her own. A plant on the windowsill, her grandfather's photograph on the desk, her work things arranged with the particular neatness of someone who has lost control of the big things and is managing the small ones carefully. She worked. She called her mother on Sundays. She went for long runs along the river in the mornings that she'd come back from quieter than when she left, her breath still fast, her eyes somewhere else. She didn't talk about Trent. I didn't push, but I noticed things. And the way she'd sometimes stop in the middle of a sentence and look at the middle distance for a second before coming back. The way she'd reach for her phone and then put it down without looking at it. The way she slept later than she used to, like her body was making up for something. She was grieving, not loudly, not in a way she'd have named as grief, but the engagement, the house, the life she'd been building. It was gone, and she was carrying that alongside everything else. And she was doing it without making it anyone's problem. That was Nora. Always had been. 3 weeks before the hearing, the Ashfords moved. Not legally, not directly. What they did was quieter, and, in its way, more aggressive than another legal filing. They started talking. Charlottesville is a small city in the way that all places with old money are small. The circle of families who have known each other for generations. You who sit on the same boards and attend the same galas, and whose children went to the same schools, is actually not that large. And Margaret Ashford had been inside that circle her entire life. Patricia called me on a Thursday afternoon. "I'm hearing things," she said. "What kind of things?" "The kind Margaret Ashford is good at. Nothing actionable, nothing that can be formally addressed." Patricia's voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath it. Yes, she's been telling people that Nora was a manipulative presence in Richard's final weeks, that she cultivated the relationship with Richard specifically to position herself for the estate, that the claim is a manufactured scheme. My jaw tightened. Who's she telling? People who matter in that county, Patricia said. People who know the judges, people who know the attorneys, people whose opinion of Nora will exist in the background of this hearing, whether we like it or not. I sat with that. Yeah, can we counter it? We can put the best case we have in front of the judge and let the facts speak, Patricia said. That's what we're going to do. A pause. But I need Nora to know this is happening. She shouldn't be surprised if she walks into that courtroom and feels a certain atmosphere. I told Nora that evening. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop, working on a grant report. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Her hand stayed on the keyboard, but she stopped typing. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She's scared, Nora said. Same thing she'd said on the courthouse steps. Yeah, I said. Scared people do this. She closed her laptop. They try to make the room decide before the room hears anything. It might work, I said honestly. Partially. Partially isn't enough for her, Nora said. For Margaret, anything less than total is a loss. She opened her laptop back up. I'll let her talk, she said. What she's saying about me isn't true. The record is what it is. I watched her go back to her grant report. I thought about the specific kind of strength it takes to say, let her talk, when the talking is designed to hollow you out. The week before the hearing, Trent showed up in Richmond. I didn't know he was coming. Neither did Nora, or if she did, she didn't tell me, which amounts to the same thing. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening and found them on the front steps of my building. Not inside. Outside. Like Trent had arrived and Nora had come down, and they'd both decided that whatever this was, it wasn't a come-inside conversation. I slowed down when I saw them, considered walking around the block, then decided that wasn't my call to make, and walked past them with a quick look at Nora that said, I'll be upstairs. Come up when you're ready. She gave me the smallest nod. I went upstairs, left the window cracked. I wasn't trying to listen. I want to be clear about that. The window was cracked because the radiator was running hot. But sound carries in still November air. I didn't come to ask you to stop, Trent said. His voice had the sound of someone who has rehearsed this and found that the rehearsal didn't help. Nora said nothing. I came because I owe you more than a phone call, he said. I owe you... I should have... He stopped. Started again. Yeah, she convinced me you were using us. Using my father. I let her convince me because it was easier than... He stopped again. Easier than what? Nora said. Not a question. An invitation to finish the sentence, if he actually could. A long pause. Easier than admitting that you were the most real thing that had happened to me in a long time, and I didn't know what to do with that. The street was quiet. So you let her throw my things in a bag, Nora said. Still even. Still steady. Yes, he said. You watched. Yes. Trent. A pause. I need you to understand something. I wasn't in that house for your family's name or your family's money. I was there because I loved your father. Because I loved that place. Because I thought I was building something real with you. Her voice dipped slightly on real. Came back up. Your mother decided what I was before she ever knew me, and you chose her version over yours. Silence. I know, he said. I'm not angry at you, she said. Oh, I want you to know that. I'm not doing this out of anger. Then why? Because it's right, she said. Because my grandfather put something in place 60 years ago to make sure his family had something to come back to. And I'm his family, and that's enough reason. Another long pause. What happens to the house? He said quietly. If you win, what happens to my mother? I heard Nora take a breath. That's not something I've decided yet, she said. That's not what this is about right now. This is about the court saying what's true. A silence, longer than the others. He liked you, Trent said. His voice had changed, gone quieter and rawer, like he'd given up on the rehearsed version entirely. My father. He told me once. He told me you reminded him of the people he grew up with. Before the money. Before all of it. A pause. He said you had roots. I heard Nora make a sound. Very small. Quickly controlled. I'm glad he said that, she said. Footsteps on the steps. Were one set going up. That was Nora. One set staying. Trent's voice, quiet, from the bottom of the steps. I'm sorry, Nora. A pause. I know you are, she said. and the door opened and closed. She came upstairs and put her back against the inside of my apartment door for about 10 seconds. Eyes closed, hands flat on the door behind her. Then she opened her eyes, pushed off the door, and went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I sat on the couch and didn't say anything. It gave her the room to land. "He's not a bad person," she said finally, standing at the sink. "No," I said, "he's not. He's a person who chose the easy thing when it mattered." She drank the water. "That's its own kind of bad. But it's not the same kind." She set the glass down. "Did you hear all of that?" she asked. "Some of it," I said honestly. She nodded. "The radiator," she said. "The radiator," I said. She almost smiled. Almost. "Joe." She turned around, leaned against the counter. "Nah, what he said about Richard. About what Richard said to him." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were working. "That he said I had roots." "Yeah," I said. "That's because I do," she said. "I have them right there in that county. Right there on that land." She looked at her hands. "I didn't even know it, and I still had them. They were there the whole time." The radiator clicked and hissed. "Your grandfather made sure of that," I said. She looked at the photograph on my kitchen counter. Know where she'd placed it that morning. "He did," she said. "The evidentiary hearing was on a Tuesday. We drove out the night before and stayed at the same Route 250 motel. Same room numbers almost. Neither of us said anything about that. In the morning, Nora was up before me. When I came out of my room, she was already dressed, standing in the parking lot in the cold with her coffee, looking west toward where the mountains would be when the light came up enough to see them. I stood beside her, and the mountains appeared slowly as the sky went from black to gray to the particular pale blue of a Virginia winter morning. First, the ridgeline, then the shapes of the individual peaks, then the color coming into the trees on the lower slopes. "He grew up looking at those," Nora said. "Yeah," I said. "Farmed under those mountains. Sold land he loved because he had to." She took a sip of her coffee, and then made sure it didn't end there. We stood there until our coffee was gone. Then we drove to Charlottesville. The courtroom was fuller than the first hearing. Word had gotten around, the way things do in a county where old families and old land intersect. And the gallery had more people in it. Some I recognized from Patricia's descriptions. Some I didn't. Margaret was in a different outfit today, dark gray, still composed. But something about her posture was different from the first hearing. Tighter, maybe. More work going into maintaining it. Fells was immaculate. A fresh set of papers. Fresh certainty. Judge Holt came in, settled, put on his glasses, and Patricia Odom stood up. She walked the court through the deed history methodically and completely. She introduced every document. Harold's original purchase, the sale to the Ashfords, the restriction. She was unhurried and exact. Then she introduced Carol Calloway. Carol walked to the witness stand in her good navy blazer and her pearl earrings. Not Margaret's kind of pearls, not a statement. Just her Sunday earrings that she wore when things mattered. And she told the court who her father was, where he grew up, what the land meant to him. She read, with permission, the letter Harold had written. Her voice was steady for all of it, except one line. "My grandchildren won't have to start from nothing the way I did," where it dipped slightly and came back up. The courtroom was absolutely quiet while she read it. Then Patricia introduced Richard Ashford's death certificate. She placed it on the exhibit table beside Harold's letter. "Your Honor," she said, "Harold Calloway drafted this restriction knowing his own family's lineage and knowing the Ashford family's lineage. He knew there was one Ashford male heir. He designed this restriction to survive exactly as long as it needed to survive." She paused. "It survived. The triggering condition has been met. The plaintiff is the documented direct descendant of the grantor. The restriction is valid, it is enforceable, and it is triggered." She sat down. Fell stood. He was good. He argued hard. He used every angle in his 42 pages, plus 3 new ones he'd developed since. He challenged the restriction's modern enforceability. He challenged the lineage documentation margins. He argued equity, that 60 years of Ashford investment in the property should weigh against a 60-year-old document. Judge Holt listened to all of it. Then, he looked at the exhibit table, at Harold's letter in its protective sleeve, at the deed restriction beside it, at the 2 photographs of Harold in front of the house. He looked at Carol Calloway in the gallery. He looked at Nora. He took his glasses off. "I've been on this bench for 19 years, he said. "I've seen property disputes of every variety, disputed boundaries, contested wills, adverse possession claims going back generations." He paused. "What I have in front of me today is something specific. A man who loved a piece of land, had to let it go, and took the one legal action available to him to make sure his bloodline had a path back to it. He looked at the restriction document. He did it properly. He filed it correctly. He attached it permanently to the deed at the moment of sale." Another pause. "The restriction is valid. The lineage is documented. The triggering condition has been met." He put his glasses back on. "I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff." The sound in the courtroom was not loud. It was the sound of a lot of people letting out a breath they'd been holding. I looked at Margaret Ashford. The sealed expression was still there, but underneath it, in the set of her shoulders, in the way her hands moved once in her lap, something had come apart. She had built her whole life on the certainty of what her family owned. And a 60-year-old letter from a man she'd probably never thought about had just changed the answer. I looked at Trent. He was staring at the front of the room. His jaw was working slightly. His hands were on his knees. He looked like a man receiving information that was reorganizing something fundamental about how he understood the world he'd grown up in. Patricia leaned toward Nora. "That's the ruling," she said quietly. "The details? The specific ownership interests? The negotiation of the property terms. That comes next. But the core question is answered." Nora nodded. She was looking at the exhibit table. At her grandfather's letter. Her hand went to her bag, to the shape of the photograph frame inside it. She didn't take it out. She didn't need to. He was already in the room. The ruling landed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Conrad Fells had filed a notice of appeal. Patricia called me when it came through. And her voice was measured, but I knew her well enough by then to hear what was underneath it. Not surprise, not worry exactly. More like the specific tiredness of someone who has been doing this long enough to know that the people who lose don't always go quietly. "What does this mean for Nora?" I asked. "It means it's not over," Patricia said. "The ruling stands while the appeal is pending, which means the Ashfords can't take any action to alter or sell the property. But Nora can't take possession yet either. We're in a holding pattern." "How long?" "Appeals court scheduling in Virginia." A pause that contained a whole answer. "Could be 6 months, could be longer." I sat with that. "Patricia, honestly, how does the appeal look?" "Honestly, a beat. Fells doesn't have new ground. He's going to re-argue what he already argued. Holt's ruling was clean and well-reasoned. Appellate courts don't overturn clean, well-reasoned rulings without cause." Another pause. "But I've been wrong before. Does Nora need to know all of this?" "Nora needs to know everything," Patricia said. "She's not someone you manage, Joe. She's someone you inform." She was right about that. I told Nora that evening. She was on the couch with her laptop working. The plant on the windowsill had a new leaf coming in that she'd been monitoring like it was a personal project. The photograph was on the desk behind her. The room had the particular settled quality of a space that someone has genuinely inhabited rather than just occupied. She listened to everything. When I finished, she closed her laptop. 6 months, she said. "Maybe longer." She nodded, looked at the window. The streetlights outside were coming on, the city going into its evening mode. "Okay," she said. "Just that." I looked at her. "That's it?" I said. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something. You just won a circuit court ruling, and now they're appealing, and you said okay." She looked at me. "Joe." Her voice was quiet. "I've been waiting since October. I can wait 6 more months." She looked back at the window. Harold waited 60 years. I didn't have anything to say to that. She opened her laptop back up. "But here's the thing about Nora. She showed me the okay. She gave me the steady voice and the measured response and the Harold-weighted 60 years logic that was completely true and completely her. What she didn't show me happened 3 days later, on a Friday night, when she thought I was asleep. I wasn't asleep. I heard her in the kitchen around midnight. Not unusual. She sometimes got up for water, but the water sound stopped and nothing else started. Just quiet. I got up. She was at the kitchen table in the dark, not crying, not on her phone. Just sitting, both hands flat on the table, looking at Harold's photograph which she'd brought out from the spare room and placed in front of her. The street light through the window made a long pale bar across the table. Her face was half in it, half out of it. I stood in the doorway for a second. She heard me. Didn't turn around. "I'm okay," she said. "I know," I said. I went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea. Set one in front of her. Sat down across from her. She looked at the photograph for another minute. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah. I miss the house." Her voice was flat. "Not because of Trent. Not because of the name, or the money, or any of that." She paused. "I miss the porch where Richard had his coffee. I miss the way the morning came through the east windows. I miss the kitchen." She looked at her tea. "I miss feeling like I was somewhere that made sense." Her hands moved around the mug. "Sigh, and now there's this whole thing, this whole legal process. And at the end of it, I might own part of it, and I have no idea what I actually want to do with that. I don't know if I can live there after everything that happened. I don't know if I want to." She looked at the photograph. "I won something that I don't know how to hold yet." The streetlight hummed outside. "Harold won something he didn't get to hold either," I said carefully. "He had to sell and walk away. But he made something with that. He took the thing he'd lost and turned it into something he could give forward." She looked at me. "I'm not sure what I'm giving forward," she said. "You don't have to know that yet," I said. "You're 31. You have time to figure out what the land becomes." She looked at the photograph. "He was 34 when he sold it," she said. I looked it up. "Then he figured it out too," I said. "Eventually." She was quiet. The tea was warm in the cold kitchen. And outside a car passed. Then quiet again. "I keep thinking about what Trent said," she said. "That his father told him I had roots." She traced the edge of the photograph frame. "I moved around a lot as a kid. Mom and I. Different apartments, different schools. I never had a place that was the place, you know. The place you came from." She looked up. "I thought I was building that, in that house. And then it got pulled out from under me." She picked up her tea. But the roots were already there," she said quietly. "Under the ground the whole time. I just didn't know." I looked at her. "Yeah," I said. "They were." She drank her tea. I drank mine. We sat in the kitchen for another hour, talking about other things. Her mother's garden, a book she'd been reading, a show I'd been watching that she hadn't started yet. Normal things, small things. When we finally went back to our rooms, she took the photograph with her. And I stood in the hallway after her door closed and thought about what it cost to fight for something true. Not the legal cost. Not the time. The personal cost. The thing it takes out of you to hold yourself steady through months of being publicly questioned and privately doubted, and still get up every morning and keep going. Nora paid that cost without complaint and without performance. That's its own kind of thing. Margaret Ashford's last move came 5 weeks into the appeal period. Then not through Fells, not through the courts. She sent a letter, to Nora, directly, by certified mail. Patricia called me the morning it arrived, her voice carrying a specific controlled irritation. "It's a settlement offer," Patricia said. "Technically, but the language is—" A pause. "You should read it." I read it. The letter offered Nora a cash payment, a significant one. Genuinely significant, in exchange for a full release of all claims to the property and an agreement to have no further contact with any member of the Ashford family. The cash amount was real money, the kind of money that could change the shape of a life. Buy a house outright, start something, build something new from the ground up. But the language around the contact clause was what Patricia had called about. It wasn't just no further contact. The wording included a provision that Nora would make no public statements about the Ashford family or the estate, that she would make no claims in any future proceeding about any Ashford property matter, and that she would acknowledge in writing that her occupancy of the estate had been as a guest, not a resident with any legal standing. That last part. As a guest. After 2 years. After Richard. After the porch and the mornings and the east windows and all of it. As a guest. I read it twice. Then I drove to Patricia's office. Nora was already there. She was sitting in Patricia's conference room with the letter in front of her, hands flat on the table, on either side of it, reading it the same way she'd read the deed restriction that first night in the motel. Carefully, completely. When she finished, she sat back. "She's trying to buy the story," Nora said. "Yes," Patricia said. "She's not just trying to settle the legal case. Oh, she wants to own the narrative too." Nora looked at the letter. "She wants me to say in writing that I was a guest, that I had no standing, that what happened in that driveway was appropriate." Patricia said nothing, letting Nora arrive at her own place. "She wants me to sign a document that says she was right about me," Nora said. "Functionally, yes," Patricia said. Nora looked at the letter. The conference room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that sits around a real decision. I watched Nora's face, watched her actually reckon with it. The money was real. I knew her situation. She was still remote working from my spare room, still figuring out the shape of the next chapter. The money would matter. But this was Margaret Ashford, sitting across a table she couldn't see, asking Nora to trade her grandfather's 60-year intention for a check and a signature on a document that called her a guest. Nora looked up. "No," she said. You don't want to think about it?" Patricia asked. Not pushing her toward yes, just making sure she wasn't deciding too fast. "I've thought about it," Nora said. "The money is real, and I appreciate that it's real. But she wants me to say I had no standing." She shook her head. "My grandfather gave me standing. A court confirmed I have standing." Her voice was level. "I'm not signing a document that says otherwise." Patricia nodded. "Once." "I'll draft the rejection," she said. "Nas, tell her we appreciate the offer," Nora said. Patricia looked at her. "Seriously," Nora said. "Tell her we appreciate it. I don't want to be ugly about this. I just want to be clear." Patricia wrote something on her notepad. "You know what this means," Patricia said. "It means we finish it," Nora said. The rejection letter went out on a Thursday. On Friday, Fells withdrew the appeal. Patricia called me at 8:15 in the morning while I was still in my kitchen with my first coffee. "So they withdrew," she said. I put my coffee down. "Why?" "I don't know their internal reasoning," she said. "But my read? The appeal was always a delay tactic. They wanted to wear Nora down, present the settlement, get the signature, and end it quietly." A pause. She didn't sign. The appeal had no new ground. Continuing it means spending more money on something Fells probably told them they wouldn't win. Another pause. "And I think Margaret Ashford realized something." "What?" "That the longer this goes, the more people hear the story," Patricia said. "And the story is not good for the Ashfords." I stood in my kitchen. "So it's over?" I said. "The legal contest is over," she said. "Now we move to the property terms. What Nora's ownership interest actually looks like in practice. How the Ashfords and Nora coexist on a property they technically share interest in." A pause. That part will require some negotiation. But it will happen from a position of strength." "Patricia," I said. "Yeah." "Thank you," I said. A pause. "Thank Harold Calloway," she said. She hung up. I stood there for a second. Then I walked to Nora's door and knocked. She answered it half awake, hair undone, in her old college sweatshirt. "It's over," I said. She looked at me. Her eyes did something. Not quite the thing that leads to crying. Something before that. A loosening. So like a fist that had been clenched for a long time, slowly opening. "The appeal," she said. "Withdrawn," I said. "The ruling stands." She stood in the doorway of my spare room for a moment. Then she turned around, picked Harold's photograph up off the desk, and looked at it. She didn't say anything for a long time. I stood in the hallway and let her have the moment. Outside, the city was waking up. Traffic starting on the avenue. Someone's dog barking twice. The ordinary sounds of a morning that didn't know it was significant. When she finally turned back around, her face had settled into something I hadn't seen on it in months. Not triumph. Not relief, exactly. Just a person standing in the right place. The property negotiation took 6 weeks. Patricia handled most of it directly with Fells, who had shifted from aggressive to professional in the way that lawyers sometimes do when the ground changes under them. The personal edge was gone. It was just paperwork now. Just terms. The deed restriction had established Nora's ownership interest in the primary parcel, the main house, and surrounding grounds. What the negotiation defined was what that looked like practically, how the interest would be structured, what each party's rights were, what the arrangement going forward would be. Patricia fought for what mattered. When it was done, Nora had 3 things: a 40% ownership interest in the primary parcel, formally recorded in the Albemarle County deed books, the deed to the original stone cottage at the eastern edge of the property, the oldest structure on the land, the one that predated the main house by decades, the one the Ashfords had used for storage for years, transferred to her in full, clear title, and the right of access to the land she co-owned, including the orchard on the south side that hadn't been properly tended in years, and that, according to the historical survey documents Harold had kept, his own father had planted. Margaret retained the main house and the majority of the operational estate. She retained her name on the property and her daily life in the house she'd lived in for 40 years. But the land remembered where it came from, and now the deed book said so. Patricia called with the final terms on a Wednesday afternoon. Nora was at the kitchen table when I told her. Same spot she'd been the night I'd found her in the dark. Same table, different light, afternoon coming through the windows, warm and bright, the kind of winter afternoon that surprises you. She listened to all 3 points. She was quiet after. "The cottage," she said. "Full title," I said. "Clear, yours?" "That's where he would have lived," she said. "When it was all farmland. That's the oldest part." "Yeah," I said. She looked at her hands on the table. "And the orchard." "His father planted it," I said. Patricia made sure that was in the record. Nora was quiet for a long time. I let her be quiet. Outside, a truck went by. The plant on the windowsill had 3 new leaves now. Harold's photograph was on the desk behind her, where it always was. "I need to call my mom," she said. "Yeah," I said. "You do." She picked up her phone. I went to my room to give her privacy. But the door was thin, and the apartment was small, and I heard Carol Calloway's voice come through the phone from 6 feet away when Nora told her. I heard what Carol did when she heard the news. She laughed. Not a small laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and old and has relief in it and joy in it and something else too. Something that sounded like it had been waiting a long time to come out. "Daddy would have," Carol started, and then couldn't finish and laughed again. "I know," Nora said. Her voice was thick. He would have, Mom." "He knew, baby." Carol's voice steadied. "He always knew someone was coming. He just didn't know who yet." The apartment was quiet, except for the 2 of them. "I'm going to go see it," Nora said. "The cottage. Will you come?" "Try to stop me," Carol said. We drove out on a Saturday. Carol met us in Charlottesville. She arrived in her good coat, with a thermos of coffee and Biscuit the cat's most recent photo on her phone lock screen, and she hugged Nora for a long time in the parking lot of the coffee shop where we met before we drove out together. The 3 of us went in Patricia's car. The Ashford driveway looked different in February. The red oaks were bare, all the autumn drama gone, just the dark lines of the trunks and branches against a gray sky. The estate sat at the end of the drive, the same as always, brick, white trim, the chimneys. But we turned off the main drive before the house. There was a smaller lane that ran east along the property line toward the old stone cottage. Patricia had arranged access through Fells, all properly documented. Nora had the right to be here. That was no longer a question. The lane was unpaved and narrow. lined with old boxwoods gone a little wild. We drove slowly. The cottage appeared through the trees gradually. Stone walls, a slate roof that needed work in one corner, small windows, a wooden door that had weathered to silver gray. It was not grand. It was not the main house. It was something better. It was the oldest thing on the land, the thing that had been there before the money came in and built the big house at the end of the fancy driveway. The thing that went back to when this was just a family's working land and the people on it knew every acre by foot. Patricia stopped the car. We got out. The air was cold and still. The fields around us were pale winter brown, the mountains visible to the west, doing their blue-gray thing in the February light. Nora walked to the cottage door. She put her hand flat on it. The old wood, the silver gray. She didn't open it yet, just stood with her hand on it. Carol came and stood beside her. I stayed back a little, gave them the space. Carol put her hand on the door beside Nora's. 2 women, 2 generations, their hands side by side on a door that had been standing on this land before either of them was born. Carol looked up at the stone wall above the door. "That's the wall," she said quietly. "What?" Nora said. "In the photograph." Carol looked at Nora. "The wall your grandfather was standing in front of. That's this wall." Nora looked up. She looked at the stone. The pattern of it. The particular way the corner was cut. Her hand stayed on the door. She reached into her bag. She took out the photograph. She held it up beside the wall. The same stones, the same corner cut, the same pattern in the mortar. Harold Calloway, silver-haired, big smile, standing right here, right where Nora was standing. The photograph had been pointing her home the whole time. She made a sound then, low and short. The sound of something that has been held a long time, finally releasing. Carol put her arm around her. I looked at the mountains. I gave them a minute. We went inside. The cottage was one main room with a small kitchen along one wall and a stone fireplace that took up most of the opposite one. The floors were wide plank oak, dry and dusty, but solid. The windows were small and deep-set in the stone walls, the way old buildings made them. Afternoon light came in low and flat and gold, when it smelled like cold stone and old wood and thyme. Carol walked slowly through the room, running her hands along the mantelpiece, looking at the floor, looking at the ceiling. "He fixed things in a room like this," she said. "I remember him telling me how the stone stays cool in summer and holds the heat in winter." She ran her hand along the wall. "He said his grandfather built the original fireplace." Nora was in the middle of the room. She was turning slowly, taking in every wall, in every window, the fireplace, the floor, the low ceiling with its old beams. "It needs work," she said. "It does," I said. "The roof in the northeast corner. Patricia flagged that. The window frames on the south side are soft." She was moving around the room now, looking at things carefully. Her grant-writing brain, the brain that assessed needs and built structures and figured out what was required to make something work, that brain had kicked in. The chimney needs to be looked at before the fireplace can be used." "All fixable," I said. She stopped in the middle of the room. "I'm going to live here," she said. Just like that. Not a question, not a plan, she was floating. Carol looked at her. "In the cottage?" I said. "It needs work, but the bones are right." She looked at the fireplace. "The bones are really right." She looked at me. "I'm not going back to Richmond. I'm not. This is where I'm supposed to be. And this specific piece of land." She looked at the wall, the stone, the afternoon light coming through the deep-set windows. "He built something here. His grandfather built something here. And I'm going to build something here." Carol was smiling. "What kind of something?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Nora said. "Something real." She looked at the photograph in her hand. "He'd like that answer," Carol said. "Yeah," Nora said. "I think he would." "I need to tell you about Margaret. Because it would be easy to end this story without her. To let her be the obstacle that got cleared, the antagonist who lost, the sealed face in the courtroom that got what was coming to it. But that's not the whole truth of what happened. 3 weeks after we first visited the cottage, when Nora had contractors coming and going and was splitting her time between Richmond and Charlottesville while the roof work started. I was sitting in the cottage doorway one afternoon, waiting for her to finish a call, when I heard a car on the lane. Not Patricia's car, not the contractor's truck, a dark sedan, moving slowly. It stopped about 20 yards from the cottage. The driver's door opened. Margaret Ashford got out. She was in a wool coat, not the blue velvet. Hair done as always, posture as always. But something was different about the way she moved, slower, more deliberate. She walked toward the cottage and stopped when she saw me. We looked at each other. I stood up. "She's on a call," I said. "Inside." Margaret nodded, stayed where she was. We stood there in the cold for a moment. "I won't be long," Margaret said. "Okay," I said. She looked at the cottage, at the new work on the roof in the northeast corner, at the boxwoods along the lane that Nora had already started trimming back. "My husband's grandfather planted those boxwoods," she said. I didn't know that," I said. "Richard used to play in them as a boy." A pause. "He told me once." She looked at the stone wall. "He liked her very much, you know. Richard." She said it to the wall, not to me. "He told Trent she was the best thing to come through that door in years." I didn't say anything. "I thought he was—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I thought he was being sentimental, the way old men get." Her jaw moved. "I was wrong about that." Still not looking at me. I was wrong about a number of things," she said. The words came out clipped and precise and cost her something visibly. Margaret Ashford did not say things like this easily. Maybe had never said things like this. "I don't expect that to change anything. I'm not here to ask for anything." She paused. "I'm here because Richard would have— he would have wanted—" She stopped. The cold air was very still. She reached into her coat pocket, took out something small. I set it on the stone wall beside the cottage door. Then she turned and walked back to her car. I waited until the car had gone back down the lane before I looked at what she'd left. It was a photograph. Old, black and white, slightly soft at the edges. A family in front of the main house. A man and woman and 2 small children. The man was in work clothes. The house behind them was younger, less settled, the trees smaller. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "The Calloway Farm." Summer. I stood there holding it. Nora came to the door behind me. "Who was that?" she said. I turned around. She looked at the photograph in my hand, at the car disappearing at the end of the lane. Her face changed as she understood. She took the photograph from me carefully, looked at the front, turned it over, read what was written on the back. "The Calloway Farm." She looked at it for a long time. Then she went inside and placed it on the mantelpiece, next to Harold's photograph, side by side. 2 photographs, 2 families, 1 piece of land. She stepped back and looked at them. "Okay," she said quietly. Not to me, to the room, to the stone walls that had been standing here since before either family had a name anyone remembered. To her grandfather, who had waited 60 years for exactly this. The roof was finished by early spring. The chimney was cleared and repointed by a mason from Waynesboro, who told Nora it was good work, original, built to last. The window frames on the south side were replaced. The floors were cleaned and sealed and came up dark and warm. The fireplace drew perfectly. On the first night Nora lit it, Carol drove out from Roanoke. They sat in front of the fire with wine and the leftover pasta. Carol had brought in a container, because that is simply who Carol is, and the 2 photographs on the mantelpiece, and the sound of the land outside going quiet, in the way that land goes quiet at night in that valley, completely, profoundly, like it's been doing this forever and doesn't need anything from you. I drove out that night too. We sat around that fire until late, talking about Harold, about Carol's childhood, the stories Harold had told her mother before he died, the ones about the land and the mountains, and the orchard, and the way the morning came off the Blue Ridge in summer, about the things he'd known, and the thing he'd done to make sure they survived him. At one point, Carol got up and went to the mantelpiece and stood between the 2 photographs. She looked at Harold's face for a long time. "He would have loved this night," she said. "Tell us something he said," Nora said. Something you remember? Carol thought about it. He used to say, she started, then smiled. He used to say that land doesn't forget, that you could sell it and fence it and build on it and rename it, and it still remembered every hand that had ever worked it. She looked at the fire. He said the land keeps its own records. The fire popped once. He was right, Nora said. Carol nodded. He was a very precise man, she said, about the things that mattered. I drive out to the cottage sometimes, on weekends. Nora has a garden started on the south side now. She got the orchard assessed in the spring, and 3 of the old apple trees were still viable, just untended, and she has a man from the county extension office helping her bring them back. She says it'll take 2 or 3 seasons before they produce properly. She says that like it's nothing, like 2 or 3 seasons is just time, and time is something she has now. She does grant writing from the cottage, rebuilt her client list, has more work than she can take. She runs along the property line in the mornings, through the fields, along the old boundary wall that her grandfather stood in front of for a photograph 6 decades ago. The main house is still there at the end of the driveway. Margaret is still in it. They don't have dinners together. They don't pretend it's something that isn't there. But when Nora's car passes the main house on her way to the lane, sometimes there's a light on in the side window. And once, early in the fall when the oaks were turning, Nora told me she was coming back from a run along the east field and she saw Margaret on the side porch with her coffee. They looked at each other across the distance of the yard. Neither of them waved, neither of them looked away. Then Nora kept running, and Margaret kept drinking her coffee, and the red oaks kept dropping their leaves in slow circles on the land that remembered every hand that had ever worked it. That was enough. Some things don't need to be resolved. They just need to be true. 2 seasons later, the orchard produced its first real harvest. Nora brought a basket of apples to Carol in Roanoke. Carol made a pie. She used her mother's recipe, the one her mother had gotten from Harold, the one that had been in the family since before anyone thought to write it down. They ate it at Carol's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, the mountains visible through the window, Biscuit asleep on the chair in the corner. Nora took a photograph of the pie and put it on the mantelpiece in the cottage. 3rd photograph, same wall. Different generation, same land.